Hi, my name is Kimberly Garcia, and we're going to talk for a minute about the Charlotte Mason method and how to teach narration. Okay, narration is basically the act of retelling, and that is when you are teaching a child how to write. You have them read a narrative selection, and we're going to be talking about the Write as it applies to the Write from History series. So you would have a child read the selection from the book that they are studying, and then you would ask that child to narrate the information back to you. Now, according to the Charlotte Mason method of teaching writing, you have the child read that information one time, and then they narrate it immediately back to you. Now, there are typically two problems that parents face whenever, or teachers rather, face whenever trying to teach a child or help a child with their narrations. Sometimes the student will forget what happened in the story. Now, there could be one or two reasons why this is happening. Now, if the student is reading information for themselves, then the reason that they're probably forgetting what happened in the story is because when they're reading words, or they may even be reading sentences, but they're not reading for content or for information. So all of their attention and focus is on the actual words themselves. And so they're having a difficult time being able to tell you the information because they're simply not paying attention to it. So what you're going to have to do in that situation is actually read the story to your child yourself instead of asking them to read the selection on their own. So that will help with that. Okay, now then we have the second problem that typically occurs when children are trying to narrate. They often begin their sentences the same. They'll say stuff like, and then what happened? And, well, not and then what happened. They'll say stuff like, they'll say, and then the president was riding, and then the man was riding on a horse. And then the man went up to the inn. And then the people at the inn told him they had no room for him. Okay, this is taken from the Landlord's Mistake, which is in Right from Early Modern History. It's a story about Thomas Jefferson when he was vice president, riding on, being all dirty and riding on a horse, looking for a place to sleep. So if a child is retelling you that information and they're beginning all their sentences the same way, they may say stuff like, as I mentioned before. So the man was riding on a horse, and then he was all covered with mud and dirt, and then he knocked on the door, and then the landlord opened the door, and then when the landlord, so you can see, when a student does that, it doesn't sound good. It's not the way we want them to narrate. It's not how narration is supposed to sound. Now, I've been thinking about this for years, and it's one of the problems that I've faced in my process of teaching my children. And one of the things that I've come up with as far as a solution to this is I've noticed that I, as the parent, will ask, and then what happened? So I prompt my children to tell me what happened next in the story whenever they may pause or forget. And the reason they're forgetting is because I'm asking them to read the story themselves, and they're not really paying attention to the content. So I may ask those questions. And when I ask the question, I'll say, and then what happened? And then what happened? So you can see the students are taking the questions that we ask and they're beginning their sentences the same way we begin the questions. So if you want to help your student get past that stage, you're going to have to use questions that begin differently. Begin those questions with prepositional phrases or clauses. So you would say something more along the lines of, after the gentleman arrived at the door, what happened? So then the student would be more inclined, you may have to train them in this, to say, after the gentleman after the gentleman arrived at the door, the landlord opened the door. So you can see you can train your student to actually begin those sentences differently. But it's going to require that you pay attention to how you're prompting them if they forget. So here's where you can actually use the first situation to help you with the second. If you read the narratives to your student, they're going to be more likely, especially if you read it with gusto, they're going to be more likely to remember the content. But if you have the student read the narratives for himself or herself, they may forget because they're not paying attention. In that case, you may have to prompt them. So if you want to practice helping your student begin sentences differently, then you can actually have them read the sentences themselves. Read the narrative themselves, and then you can prompt them and make sure you prompt with questions that begin with prepositional phrases or dependent clauses. And I really think that will help. I've actually seen it happen with my fourth child. I don't know that I believe that I intuitively did this with my older children, and it wasn't until I realized how I was adjusting and adapting my teaching to my children that I began to practice it more deliberately. So again, this is narration according to the Charlotte Mason method. It's just a little trick to help you and your student make narration or the process of narration more successful. So if you want to reach us, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to contact us at www.writefromhistory.com. That's write as in W-R-I-T-E. www.writefromhistory.com. And thanks.